Queridos amigos, todas las series y películas en este canal están en su idioma original ruso. Para activar los subtítulos en español, por favor siga estos sencillos pasos. En la esquina inferior derecha hagan clic en configuración, seleccionen subtítulos, elijan el idioma y por supuesto no se olviden de suscribirse a este canal. Que disfruten del cine ruso.
As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself metamorphosed in his bed into an insect-like vermin of grotesque proportions. He was lying on his armor-like back, and if he looked down he could see the dome of his brown belly divided into curved segments with the bedclothes resting precariously on top. His numerous little legs wriggled helplessly before his eyes.
What's happened to me?
This was no dream. His room was exactly as before. On the desk was his collection of cloth samples. Samsa was a commercial traveler. And above it hung the picture he had recently cut out of an illustrated periodical and made an attractive gilded frame for. Gregor's gaze then turned to the window, and the dismal weather outside made him feel quite despondent. Why not just go back to sleep for a while and forget all this nonsense? But that was impossible because he was used to sleeping on his right side, and he was unable to get into that position in his present form. People need their sleep. This endless getting up so early is enough to drive you insane. Oh God, what an exhausting profession he'd landed himself in. Fretting about trains, rushed meals, no time for real friendships. Another few years, that's all, and he'd have paid his father's debts off. Then he'd be gone.
Oh, it's 27.
The next train left at 7. To catch that one, he would have to hurry like mad. And even if he did catch that train, he wouldn't escape a thunderous dressing down from his employer, because the office boy would have waited for the 5 o'clock train and long since reported Gregor's absence. What if Gregor reported in sick? Well, that would be suspect, though, since Gregor had never been off ill in his entire 5 years' service. The company doctor would be straight round to pronounce him fit, and he was probably right. Gregor felt, actually, quite well, and was even ravenously hungry.
Gregor? 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 Almost 7:15. Didn't you want to be off long ago?
Yes! Good heavens, what's happened to my voice?
Thank you, Mother. I'm getting up now.
Gregor tried to disguise his voice through the most controlled enunciation and by leaving gaps between the words.
Gregor? Oh, God. Gregor? What's the matter? Gregor? Gregor!
The conversation had made the other family members aware that Gregor was still at home, contrary to expectations.
Gregor? Are you unwell? Do you need anything?
I am nearly ready.
Gregor, open the door. Gregor, please.
Gregor, it's very late.
Gregor, open the door.
The wooden doors must have muffled the sound enough to convince the others that there was nothing seriously wrong, as Gregor's mother shuffled off and his father made his way to the table, which was adorned with various dishes because for him breakfast was the most important meal of the day, which he stretched out for hours, reading through a variety of newspapers. At this point, Gregor just wanted to be left in peace, get up, get dressed, and above all, have some breakfast. He had absolutely no doubt the change in his voice was nothing more than the sign of an oncoming cold, an occupational hazard of the commercial traveller. Throwing off the bedclothes was quite simple. He just needed to puff up his abdomen and they fell off by themselves. But after that it became difficult. He would have needed arms and hands to get himself upright. Instead of that, however, he had only these numerous little legs, which he simply could not control. He could have done with some help, but of course the doors were all locked. If he could just get his head out, maybe his body would follow. But if he ended up falling, it would be a miracle if he didn't injure his head, and he could not afford to be rendered unconscious at this juncture.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Gregor only had to hear the initial greeting of the visitor to know immediately who it was, only the supervisor himself. Did he have to come, thereby demonstrating to the entire innocent family that the investigation of this suspicious affair could be entrusted only to the judgment of someone as senior as himself?
Mr. Samsa. Mrs. Samsa? I have come to inquire after Mr. Samsa. Mr. Samsa Jr., that is, of course. I am concerned that he is unable to carry out his duties.
Gregor, your supervisor is here.
I heard something fall in there.
Gregor? Your supervisor is asking why you didn't leave by the early train. We don't know what to tell him. He wants to speak to you in person. Please, open the door. I'm sure he will be kind enough to excuse the untidiness of your room.
He does that. He locks all the doors at night. From staying in boarding houses. You know what sort of types you can get there.
Good morning, Samsa.
He's not well. He's not well, believe me. Why else would my Gregor miss his train? My boy has nothing in his head but his job. No, I sometimes worry about him. He stays in every evening, quietly reading the newspaper or poring over railway timetables. His only bit of relaxation is his woodwork. He made a lovely picture frame recently, really lovely, beautifully cut out and painted with little sort of gold bits. You'll be amazed by how beautiful it is. Yes, it's hanging in his room. You'll see it when he opens the door. He must be unwell. I mean, he must be. I know that he said that he wasn't, but I'm sure that he is not well.
I can think of no other explanation, Samsa. I only hope it isn't serious. At the same time, I must say that we business people, like it or not, simply have to overcome any slight indisposition for the sake of, dare I say it, of our business.
Yes, of course. Of course, you must. Can the supervisor come in now?
No!
An embarrassed silence ensued in the room. And what was Greta crying for? Because Gregor was in danger of losing his job? Of course he wasn't. A suitable excuse would be found later for his apparent impoliteness.
Samsa, what is the meaning of this? You barricade yourself in your room, you refuse to answer any of our questions in an appropriate manner, you cause great concern to your good parents here, as well as, and I merely mention this in passing, as well as neglecting your company duties in a most unacceptable way. This great city of ours produces the finest textiles in the world, and you represent the best textile manufacturer in the city. The cloth samples you carry in our name should be badges of pride. Samsa, I am speaking to you now on behalf of your parents and of your employer himself when I demand an explanation for this tomfoolery. I am amazed, Samsa, quite amazed. Think of your duty for once. You're letting everybody down.
Just momentary attack of giddiness, that's all, sir. I'll be there in a time.
What is going on in there?
Just a second, everybody. I didn't set back, don't worry. I'll be with you in no time at all.
Evidently they couldn't understand what he was saying anymore. His words had sounded clear enough to him, perhaps as a result of his ear becoming attuned to his voice.
How such a thing could come along, I don't know. I'm better now, I assure you.
Did you hear that? Is he making fools of us?
Oh, he's terribly ill. And we are tormenting him. Greta? Greta, get a doctor, quick! Your brother is very ill. Did you hear him speak?
That was an animal's voice.
Anna,
Yes, sir?
get a locksmith here at once. Greta, go with her.
You're making a dreadful exhibition of yourself, Samsa. No less a person than our esteemed employer himself hinted to me earlier this morning that there might be a possible explanation for your absence. The collection of cash payments entrusted to you recently? Oh, there's more than a hint of embezzlement. Of course, I swore to him on my word of honor that this could not possibly be the case. But now that I have witnessed this inconceivable stubbornness on your part, I am beginning to lose the desire to defend you any further, Samsa, any further at all. Indeed, your position is not the most secure, not at all, I can tell you. I had wanted to discuss this in private with you, Samsa. But since you don't mind wasting my time here, I see no reason why your parents shouldn't hear this as well, much as I regret causing them further anxiety, of course. Indeed, your results have been far from satisfactory, Samsa, far from satisfactory. Oh, I realize that this is not exactly perhaps the time of year to do particularly good business, but the time of year to do no business at all does not exist, Samsa. Must not exist! What was that?
Gregor was trying to turn the key in the lock, and because he had no teeth, he injured his soft, fleshy mouth in the process.
Listen. He's turning the key.
Mother! Did you see me? So don't know. It's me, Gregor. Don't allow myself. Mother? Sir! Please, wait, don't go. I beg of you. I can explain everything. You see, sir, I am not stopping. I'm willing to work. I'm going to get dressed. Back up myself isn't beyond that training no time. It's a hard life, but I wouldn't be without it. Don't want me down at the office, sir. I have to provide for my parents and my sister. People get me one idea about this commercial Japanese show because one of that making the money was not over this whole show. I assure you. I worked very hard. Put in a good word for me. So. I start going backwards. Very well.
Gregor's father was now intent solely on driving him back into his room. No entreaty, no pleading by Gregor was understood. It was no use as long as his words sounded like an incomprehensible noise, easily mistaken for aggression, rather than pleas for mercy. Not until late that evening did Gregor wake from his deep, exhausted sleep. The electric street lamp cast faint patches of light onto the higher parts of his room, but down on the floor it was dark. For the first time he recognized the value of his antennae as they led him through the darkness towards some form of nourishment, which he was overjoyed about as he was hungrier than ever. He was filled with remorse as he realized his sister had put it there deliberately, knowing that milk was his favorite food. In the drawing room, as Gregor could see through the gap in the door, the evening lights were on. He was filled with pride at the thought that he had provided his family with such a lovely apartment and comfortable lifestyle. Gregor had remained close only to his sister, and it was his secret plan to send her to the music academy the following year, since, in contrast to him, she loved music and could play the violin so evocatively. During his visits home, the music academy would often be mentioned when chatting to his sister, but only ever as a beautiful dream with no chance of even thinking of it becoming a reality. Gregor's parents were averse to hearing any mention of these innocent illusions, but Gregor had very definite thoughts about it and fully intended to formally announce his plans on Christmas Eve.
Now what does he think he's up to? How could he do this to us?
Would you like another beer, Father?
No.
I could get the caretaker to fetch you.
No. Thank you.
But what if all this peacefulness, all this comfort, all this security should now end in torment? Gregor's father was a healthy man, but one who was getting on, hadn't worked for 5 years, and certainly couldn't expect to do very much now. During those 5 years, which constituted the first leisure time of his hard-working but unsuccessful life, he had put on a lot of weight and had therefore become rather cumbersome. And was Gregor's elderly mother really now expected to earn money, suffering from asthma as she did, finding it exhausting to even walk around the apartment and spending every second day on the sofa by the open window struggling for breath? And his sister, no more than a child at 17, whose life up to now had been allowed to consist of putting on pretty clothes, sleeping in, helping out in the house, enjoying a few simple pleasures in life, and above all, playing the violin. Should she be expected to go out and earn a living all of a sudden? Such thoughts filled Gregor with shame and remorse, and he forced himself under the couch, where he immediately felt more at ease, and only regretted that his body was too wide to fit completely underneath. Not until late into the night did the light in the drawing room go out. He could clearly hear his sister's footsteps retreating to bed. He knew that now no one would come to visit him before morning, so he had plenty of time to think over how he was to reorganize his life.
Goodbye, Greta.
Seeing that Gregor hadn't touched the bread and milk, Greta had brought him a whole selection of morsels to see what he liked, and very considerately she withdrew from the room as quickly as she could, since she knew that Gregor would not eat in front of her, and then even turned the key to tell Gregor that he could proceed at his leisure. The fresh pieces of food didn't appeal to him at all. He couldn't even bear the smell of them.
Would you like a little more coffee, Father? Hmm?
Please, sir. Please, Mr. Samsa. Please let me go, I beg of you. I peeped in today, sir. Forgive me. In there, sir, I did. Mr. Samsa, for the love of God, and I saw it. I saw it. I am very sorry, Mrs. Samsa. But I can't stay here any longer. I won't breathe the tiniest word about it, ma'am. I swear in God's name I won't, sir. But with that in there, I can't.
All right. Shh.
Thank you, Mr. Samsa, thank you. Thank you, ma'am, thank you, miss, thank you, thank you.
As early on as the first day, the father presented to the mother and sister the full picture of their finances and their prospects. He took out some sort of receipt or notebook from the small safe that he had salvaged from the collapse of his business. These statements of the father's would be the first welcome news that Gregor had heard since his incarceration. He had always thought that his father had been left with not a single penny from the failed business. At least his father had never said anything to the contrary, and Gregor had, of course, never asked him about it. At that time, Gregor's overriding concern had been to work as hard as he was able to allow his family to forget as soon as possible the business disaster that had reduced them all to a state of complete despair.
It will be difficult without Anna, but it's no bad thing in some ways. And we cannot tell how long it will be before Gregor is back to his old self and resumes his duties at the company. We must think carefully about our finances, and indeed, our future. Fortunately, I am a prudent man. When under unfortunate and unforeseeable circumstances, my business suffered a difficult end 5 years ago, I managed to rescue a certain sum of money. And from the money Gregor brings in, I've also been able to put by a little each month, over and above the necessary expenditures. Now, this modest sum I have been adding to my own money, and the interest, quite naturally, has gradually accumulated.
Father, I'm sorry, I don't quite...
As I was saying, I've been making our capital grow to the best of my ability. I understand these things. We are not penniless, but the interest is not enough to keep us going. And once we start eating into the capital, the situation will very quickly become desperate. We must pray for Gregor's speedy recovery.
Gregor. My Gregor.
Mother, please.
My little boy.
Mother. Mother, don't upset yourself. He'll soon be well again.
Let's hope so.
Under what sort of pretext the doctor and the locksmith had been ushered out of the room on that first morning, Gregor had no means of finding out, since it didn't occur to anyone, not even to his sister, that just because he couldn't be understood, he could nevertheless understand everyone else. And so whenever his sister came in to feed him, he had to content himself with listening to her occasional sighs and invocations to the higher powers.
Our saints preserve us.
Knowing that Gregor couldn't make himself understood, Greta had made the effort to grasp what it was that he wanted. She pushed his old chair to the window so that he could climb up onto it and look out from time to time. In the first 14 days, Gregor's parents couldn't bring themselves to come in to see him, and he often overheard how they fully appreciated his sister's present efforts, whereas they had often previously been irritated by her, since she had seemed to them a somewhat useless girl.
Could I not look in on him, just quickly?
Certainly not. No, Mother.
Well, is there any improvement?
He hasn't touched a thing again.
He hasn't eaten anything for a fortnight. What are you giving him?
It's not my fault.
Gregor, my son. Let me see him. Gregor, my son, my poor boy, Gregor. Let me see him, please. Please, let me see him.
Come, Mother, come now. He'll be well again soon if our prayers are answered. Come along, it'll be all right. It's all right. It's all right.
I just want to see my son.
You can't think of him like that at the moment, Mother. Let me look after him until he gets better. I know what I'm doing. I've got used to his hideousness, but it would be too much for you with your sensitive nature.
You listen to Greta, Mother. She knows best. Hmm? There.
On one occasion, it must have been about a month after Gregor's metamorphosis, and there was no particular reason any longer for his sister to be astonished by his appearance, she came in a little earlier than usual, showing great caution, as if he might be lying in wait somewhere to leap out and bite her, and when she caught sight of him, she started back in fright and shut the door sharply. He realized from this that she found the sight of him repugnant, that she would inevitably continue to find him repugnant forevermore. In order to spare her from having to look at him, he carried the bedsheet to the couch and arranged it in such a way that his sister couldn't see him, even if she bent down, a task that took him 4 hours. And that is how he intended it to be whenever she came in to feed him. At night he would often gaze out of the window, and with every passing day his vision grew dimmer and dimmer until he could have believed he was staring out at a wasteland where the sky and the landscape merged indistinguishably together. The monotony of his existence was stultifying. He didn't have a lot of space to crawl about in, was finding it difficult to lie still at night, and was failing to derive the slightest pleasure from eating anymore. So he adopted the habit of climbing all over the walls and ceiling as a distraction. It was quite different from being down on the floor. It was easier to breathe. A gentle fluttering sensation went through his body. He particularly liked hanging upside down from the ceiling, and in the state of almost joyful relaxation that he found himself in up there, it could happen that he'd lose his grip and crash down onto the floor. But by now, of course, he had gained far more control over his body, and a fall like that didn't injure him in the slightest. His sister noticed this new pastime that Gregor had found for himself. He left behind traces of the sticky substance from his clambering around, so she seized on the idea of making as much room as possible for him to crawl about in.
That's good.
And he was reassured that she was pleased with his attempts to hide himself away.
Gregor needs more space to move around in. I need you to help me move some of his furniture out.
The sister went ahead to check that everything in the room was in order. And only then would she allow the mother in.
Now, I've made sure you won't see him, Mother. Oh, this is not the moment. You're not strong enough yet. All in good time, I promise. Come along. Right. Let's start with the bedside cabinet. Then we can remove the desk.
Gregor was alarmed by Greta's words. For a start, the bedside cabinet had all his woodworking tools in it.
Be careful, Greta. You'll hurt your back if you try to lift it like that.
Go first, Mother. We have to move it somehow or other. You get that end.
You know, we'll never manage it before Father.
What did she think? Did he really wish to allow his cosy room, so welcomingly furnished with heirloom pieces, to be changed into a cavernous space in which he would undoubtedly be free to crawl in all directions, but at the same time quickly and completely forget his human past? Nothing should be removed. Everything had to stay.
Right. The desk.
And if the furniture did prevent him from this ridiculous clambering around, then it wasn't a drawback, but a great advantage.
Get that end.
I'm not sure this is right.
Mother, what is the matter now?
Oh, well, when I look at the empty space by Gregor's bed, it makes me feel sad. And I just wonder how he would feel.
Feel? What do you mean, feel? Let's get a move on.
Hasn't he always been used to seeing this furniture since he was a young boy? Won't he feel a bit lost without it?
Mother, let me be the judge of that. Who's been looking after him all this time? He needs the space to crawl about in.
He had come perilously close to forgetting his human past, and only been shaken out of it by the sound of his mother's voice, which he hadn't heard for so long.
Don't you think that by removing his furniture, we are showing him that we have given up all hope of him ever getting better? No, I think it's best if we leave the room exactly as it always was, and so that when Gregor returns to us, it will be all the same, and he won't be reminded of what happened to him in between times.
Mother, you're being silly now. I know him. I'm the one that sees to him, aren't I? We should clear the whole room bit by bit. Now come along, take that end again.
Was the motivation behind his sister's determination to take away everything that was dear to him entirely selfless? She wanted to rob him of everything. Well, there was one thing they were not going to have.
I'm not sure if we'll be able to manage the wardrobe.
It looks awfully heavy. You beast!
These were the first words his sister had addressed to him directly since his metamorphosis.
Smelly salts!
Gregor wanted to help his sister, as he had always done in the past. He could save the picture later.
Greta, I know where they are.
What is going on?
Gregor was your home. Gregor's broken our mother's fighting in there.
He has. I knew it. I kept saying it, but you women wouldn't listen.
It's all right. Father's home. He'll see to Gregor.
Gregor had never really pictured his father the way he stood there now. Was this still his father? The same man who used to be lying wearily ensconced in his bed when Gregor left for work? The same man who used to greet him in his dressing gown from his armchair, unable even to stand up but only raise a hand in a gesture of welcome when Gregor returned from work in the evenings? And who, during the rare family walks on a few Sundays of the year, would be wrapped in his old overcoat, shuffling forward between Gregor and his mother, carefully testing the way with his stick and moving a little slower than their already leisurely pace? With his last look back before he lost consciousness completely, Gregor saw how his mother threw her arms round his father, and her hands grasping at him, she begged him to spare Gregor's life. Gregor's severe wound, which had afflicted him for more than a month, seemed to have prompted even his father to recall that despite his present regrettable and repulsive condition, Gregor was still a member of the family who shouldn't be treated like an enemy, but on the contrary, that it was the duty of the family to suppress their disgust and to tolerate him.
Father? Mother? I've been thinking. I would say that we've been rather unkind to Gregor. A few weeks ago, we were very hostile to him, and he must have got the impression that we have given up hope with him. If we're ever to get him back, we must think about him in a positive way. Since that last time when he broke out, he's been very well behaved. He hasn't done anything silly. As a sort of reward, I suggest we leave the door to his room slightly ajar for 1 or 2 hours every evening. You won't be frightened, will you, Mother?
No. That's a lovely thought, Greta dear.
Gregor had permanently lost some mobility as a result of his wound, and it took a long time for him to cross his room like an old invalid. Climbing about on the ceiling was now out of the question. But this privilege of being allowed to watch the family for 2 hours every evening compensated him totally, in his opinion, for his deteriorating condition. He could listen to their conversation with general consent, unlike before.
Mother? Bonjour. Je m'appelle Greta. J'ai 17 ans. Comment allez-vous?
Is that French, dear?
Yes, Mother, I'm learning another language. I'm not going to stay a shop assistant all my life, you know.
Very good, dear.
You're working very hard, my dear.
Father, come along, Father. It's time for bed.
Oh, this is a life, eh? Peace and quiet in my old age. You are both a great comfort to me. What's still all this to clear away and all the washing up to do? No, we can't have this. Life is hard enough as it is. And me working at the bank and You at the store, and you taking in all the sewing and mending. Oh. We're overdoing it, my pet. We should get someone in. I can afford it now. I shall see to it. I shall see to it.
If you wouldn't keep making a mess of your uniform, that would be a help. As much as Mother keeps cleaning and pressing it, you keep dropping half your dinner down it.
Stuff and nonsense. Are you coming to bed soon, my dear? Good night, Greta.
Good night, Father.
And the wound in his back started to trouble Gregor all over again, particularly on those occasions when the mother and the sister had put the father to bed, leaving their respective tasks untouched, and then huddled together, whispering.
I mean, he doesn't know that I've had to sell all my jewellery.
Don't tell him, Mother, it would kill him. He's so proud again. We'll manage somehow. Let him get someone in.
We should move to a smaller apartment.
How could we?
I think you better shut the door now, Greta.
Gregor was convinced that they could have moved apartments if they really wanted to. They could easily have transported him in a suitable crate, if it had a few air holes in it. The nights and days Gregor spent almost entirely without sleep. Sometimes he imagined that the next time the door was opened, he would take the family affairs in hand again, just as he used to in the old days. After all this time, there appeared in his thoughts a cashier from a hat shop whom he had tried to court ardently, but too slowly, and a chambermaid from a provincial hotel, a fond and fleeting memory. At other times he was in no mood to worry about his family, but instead was filled with anger at the neglectful treatment he was receiving, and despite the fact that he had no idea what he might have fancied eating, he nevertheless made plans to raid the larder to take what was rightfully his, even if he wasn't in the slightest bit hungry. But who in this overworked and exhausted family could spend more time looking after Gregor than was absolutely necessary? Without really thinking about how to do something special for him, his sister would bring any old scraps into his room before she went off to work in the mornings and after lunch, and then in the evenings clear it up again in perfunctory fashion, completely indifferent to whether Gregor had tried a little bit of the food or left it completely untouched. He always hoped that when his sister came in, the sight of his situation would act as some sort of reproach to her. But he could have waited there for weeks without achieving any improvement in her attitude. She could see the state of things just as well as he could, but she had simply decided to do nothing about it. Yet on the other hand, she made absolutely sure, with a touchiness that made the whole family suffer, that clearing up Gregor's room was her exclusive prerogative.
What do you think you're doing?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I have told you again and again. Father! Father! Look what she's doing! Tell her!
What, Greta? What? What is it?
Why don't you trust me, any of you? You think I don't look after him. You think I can't clean him out. I can't do everything now. I've got my own job.
This is intolerable. You should not interfere. That is her domain. And you should not be taking so much on your shoulders anyway. You've got enough to do working full time. I will not have it. I will not have it!
Come in.
But even if the sister, exhausted from her job, was already fed up with looking after Gregor the way she used to, the mother would not have needed to intervene, and there would have been no reason to neglect him, because the cleaner was there now. This old widow, whose powerful build had enabled her to survive the worst of what life had thrown at her, wasn't at all repulsed by Gregor.
Well, I never. Just look at that funny old cockroach. To you too. Oh, you don't have pong. Come on then, you smelly old woodlouse. Just you there. That's better. I think we understand each other just fine. Oh, yeah. It's springtime again. A quick once over for you, Mr. Cockroach, because you are a bit of a stinker. Never mind, can't help it, I suppose.
If only this cleaner had been told to tidy his room up instead of being allowed to disturb him pointlessly just because she felt like it.
But you ought to try and take more care of yourself. You are a bit of a mess, if you don't mind my saying so. Well, that's enough of that. Bye-bye.
Gregor now hardly ate anything anymore, but occupied his long hours with ambling through the detritus in his room. And after such perambulations would feel tired to death and miserable.
That's me done for the day. I'll see you tomorrow, you woodlouse.
His family had acquired the habit of pushing things into his room that they hadn't got space for anywhere else. And there were now a lot of these things because they had let one of the rooms in the apartment to 3 lodgers.
Good afternoon, madam.
These earnest gentlemen were obsessional about tidiness, not just in their room, but in the whole household. Moreover, they had brought with them most of their own household items. For this reason, many things had become superfluous, which weren't actually saleable, but which the family didn't want to throw away either, and all of these found their way into Gregor's room. The lodgers took their supper in the drawing room. They sat down where the family used to sit in the old days, unfolded their napkins, and the one who was sitting in the middle and appeared to be regarded as in charge by the other 2 picked up his knife and fork. The family had never before let out rooms and therefore greatly overdid their courteousness to the lodgers. The family themselves ate in the kitchen, but the father came in to verify the lodgers' satisfaction. The lodgers rose in unison and muttered something into their beards. When they were alone again, they ate without speaking. It seems strange to Gregor that of all the varied sounds made when eating, it was the chomping of their teeth that came through most clearly, as if demonstrating to him that in order to eat, teeth were needed, and that it was impossible to get anywhere with even the finest jaws if they had no teeth.
If my daughter's playing is disturbing the good gentleman, it shall be stopped immediately.
On the contrary. Perhaps the young lady would like to come into the greater comfort of the drawing room and play for us here.
Oh, most certainly. Most certainly. Gentlemen, thank you. Too kind, I'm sure.
The gentleman stepped back into the drawing room and waited. Soon the father arrived with the music stand, the mother with the sheet music, and the sister with the violin. The sister then got everything ready to play. The father leaned against the door in his buttoned-up livery jacket, his right hand thrust between two of the buttons, whilst the mother was offered a chair by one of the gentlemen. And because she didn't move the chair from where the gentleman had put it, was left sitting to one side. It was on that very evening, and Gregor couldn't remember hearing the violin in all this time, that there came the sound of it being played again. Could Gregor be an animal if music moved him like this? It seemed to him that this music was showing him the way to the unknown nourishment he craved. His sister shouldn't stay with him by force, but of her own free will, and he would confide to her that he had fully intended to send her to the music academy, and that if the current unfortunate circumstances hadn't prevented it, he would have announced it to everyone last Christmas. Christmas had surely been and gone by now, hadn't it? At this announcement, his sister would be moved to tears, and Gregor would raise himself up as far as her shoulders and kiss her neck, which he had kept free of ribbons or collars since she had started working in the shop.
Mr. Samsa!
I demand an explanation. Do we not?
Indeed we do.
Quite so. We were not informed, as I recall, that we would be sharing our accommodation with that.
Never a word.
Kept completely hush-hush. I demand an explanation, Samsa. At once.
On the spot.
Forthwith.
Without delay.
I wish it to be known that in view of the quite repugnant conditions prevailing in this abode, I herewith tender our notice with immediate effect.
Quite so.
Precisely. Indeed. And for the time we have been here, we will of course not pay a single penny. Rather, may you be forewarned that we shall be considering whether or not to take legal action by way of gaining some redress. Ha!
Mother? Father? We cannot go on like this. If you cannot see it, I can. I refuse to utter the name of my brother in front of this monster. I will say very simply, we must be rid of it. We have tried our best to look after it and to tolerate its presence. I don't think anyone can blame us now. We have suffered enough!
She's right.
We must find a way of getting rid of it. Otherwise it'll kill you both. I can see it coming. We can't all go on working as hard as we do because of this monster in our midst and putting up with this endless torture in our own home. You, Father, slaving away as a glorified errand boy bringing breakfast to the lowliest minion. Mother working her fingers to the bone with all this dressmaking. Me, run off my feet all day in the shop. And then there's the mess.
But what are we to do, my child? If only he understood us. If only he understood, we could come to some sort of agreement.
He must go! It's the only way, Father. You must stop believing that it's Gregor anymore. Our misfortune is that we've gone on believing it for so long. How can it be Gregor? Gregor would have realised long ago that it was impossible for humans to live together with a creature like that. He would have left us of his own free will. We would lose our brother, but we could go on with our lives and hold him dear in our memories. But as it is,
This creature persecutes us, drives our lodgers out so that he can occupy the whole apartment. Look, he's starting again. Don't you dare! Haven't you done enough already?
Leave him. Leave him. Look, he's going back to his room.
Gregor began his efforts anew. When he had completed the turn, he started to move straight ahead. He was amazed by the considerable distance which separated him from his room, and couldn't understand how, in his weak state, he had covered the same distance just a short time beforehand, and scarcely been aware of it. It was only when he was at the doorway that he turned his head.
At last.
And now, Gregor asked himself. He soon discovered that he could no longer move at all. He didn't find this surprising. Rather, he thought it must have defied the laws of nature that he'd been able to maneuver himself about on these little legs at all up to now. Apart from this, he felt relatively comfortable. It was true that his whole body ached, but it was as if the pain was getting weaker and weaker and would eventually disappear altogether. He now even scarcely felt the rotting apple in his back and the inflamed area around it. He thought back on his family with tenderness and love. Then his head sank fully down of its own accord. His opinion that he had to disappear was, if at all possible, even more resolute than his sister's. In this state of peaceful reflection, he remained until the clock tower tolled 3 in the morning. Then he just managed to glimpse the world outside his window growing lighter.
Come on, you idle old cockroach. Get up. It's morning. Oh, so we're sulking, are we? Come on. Come on. Itchy kitchy coo. Well, I never. Here! Come and look at this! Doug Beetle's gone and kicked the bucket. Well and truly kicked the bucket.
Dead?
That's what I said. Stiff as a board.
Thanks be to God.
Must get on.
Nothing left of him.
Come in with us for a while, Greta.
Where is our breakfast?
Leave my house at once.
What do you mean?
Exactly what I say. Out! All of you! Now!
All right. We'll go then.
that's me done for today.
Is there something?
Don't you fret about how to get rid of it. Don't you fret about that side of it. It's all been seen to.
Well?
And a very good morning to you, too.
I shall dismiss her tomorrow. Oh, come on, you two. We must put all this behind us. Pay me a little attention now.
Then all three left the apartment together, something they hadn't done for months, and took the tram into the open country outside the city. They discussed their prospects for the future, and it became evident on closer examination that these weren't at all bad, since all three of their jobs looked especially promising. But the best and most immediate improvement would be gained by moving to a smaller, less expensive but more conveniently situated apartment than the one Gregor had found for them. The carriage in which they sat alone was bathed in warm sunlight. It struck Mr. and Mrs. Samsa as they observed their young daughter how, despite all the suffering which had given her such pallid cheeks, she had blossomed into a lovely young woman.
I'm to find her a good husband.
And it was like a confirmation of their newfound dreams and aspirations that at the end of their journey, their daughter was the first to rise to her feet and stretch her young body.